Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you for today's webinar. Today is all about exploring the new Google Sheets and Looker integration, what Looker is calling connected sheets, which went GA, generally available a couple months ago. And the goal of today is really to talk you through both how the integration works, why you might want to use it, why you might not want to use it, talk through kind of how you get it set up, and dive into a bit of a demo. So there'll be a bit of slides at the top, and then we're going to jump into a brief demo, kind of show you how to build a pivot table using this new integration. Before I get there, a couple points of admin. If you haven't joined us before, I know there's many people on this webinar who have joined one or many of these before. We do these every 2 weeks. These webinars are focused on Looker. We are from Spectacles. We sell software that integrates with Looker, but for the most part, these webinars aren't really about Spectacles. They're really just about bringing the Looker community together every 2 weeks and finding topics that are interesting so that we can all kind of scale up and learn more about how to be an effective Looker user, a LookML developer, whatever it might be. We've got one more webinar already announced for 2 weeks' time, which is a deep dive into your Looker instance with the System Activity Explorers. The System Activity Explorers are a way that you can understand kind of diagnostic information about your Looker instance. It can be really powerful, but we find it's kind of can be relatively under leveraged. And so we're really excited to dig into it, kind of talk people through what it is, but most importantly, like how they can use it in a couple of kind of specific use cases. You can always watch all of our prior webinars and sign up for all future ones at spectacles.dev/webinars. Perfect. Who am I? My name is Dylan Atlas Baker. I'm one of the co-founders here at Spectacles. I had to figure this out this morning. I've got about 7 years of experience developing on Looker. I had the kind of, I guess, fortuitous experience of being part of one of the first big European enterprise rollouts of Looker in 2016. And then for a long time, I was a consulting partner for Looker, managed 10 plus Looker instances over the years, helping people either kind of build them up from scratch or more often than not kind of come in after they've been going for a couple of years and help them overhaul, refactor, improve the engagement that they get with Looker and the performance across their organizations. So I'm going to jump into the webinar proper in just a second. Some of you will have heard me say this while we were waiting to get started, but we use a Slack community, our kind of Spectacles Slack community for the Q&A and for all the conversation around these webinars. So if you're not in there yet, we'd highly recommend it. There's typically tons of conversation and questions as the webinar is going on. I've just dropped the link to that if you want to sign up, or if you're already registered, it'll take you there and just log you in. And the name of the channel itself, which is Webinar Connected Sheets. So towards the end of this, we'll have a Q&A, and that's where I'll be pulling the questions from. So we'd love to have you over there. And as you'll see, many people have already done. They've let us know where they're calling from today, and so we'd love to have all of you do that as well. Awesome. So let's jump in. We're going to kind of break this down into roughly five sections today. The first is, hey, I already pay for Looker. Why should I use Google Sheets? The second is we're going to walk through kind of how it works. The third is how you can monitor usage of this new integration. The fourth is kind of the more nitty gritty of like how you connect and what your requirements are. And then we're going to jump into a Google Sheet and actually show you live how to get it set up and how it works. If at any point you have questions, please drop them in the Slack and I'll aim to answer them at the kind of towards the end of the session. So let's talk as my mouse disconnects. Why use Google Sheets? The answer, at least my answer, this isn't like a official answer from Looker or anything like that. This is my view on this. So the reason that people might want to do analysis in Google Sheets, or why you might want to set up this integration, is the same reason that you've probably heard in your organization that people kind of just export stuff to do stuff in Google Sheets to begin with. Often it's that they want to do their own in-depth analysis, and for them, a spreadsheet, whether it's Excel or Google Sheets, is the tool that they are most familiar with, the most comfortable with. And ultimately, for me, it comes to meeting people where they are. And so if people are really comfortable in Google Sheets or in Excel or whatever it might be. Different organizations are going to take a different view on this. Some will say, hey, we want everything in Looker. Our job is to get people over to Looker. They may be more comfortable in Sheets, but really our job is to get them more comfortable in Looker than they are in Sheets. And I think that's a totally reasonable argument. And if that's the way that you operate as an organization, totally fine. This integration, I guess, may not be for you. But I think if your view as a data team, as a BI team, as an analytics engineering team, whatever your teams call themselves, if your view is our role is to get people to make the highest quality decisions using data across the organization, or to get as many people using data that is reliable, comes from a single source of truth or whatever it might be. Often the best thing you can do is define this central semantic layer and then empower people to use it wherever they want. So for many people, that'll be in Looker. But as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, for some people, maybe that's in Looker Studio, what used to be Data Studio. And for many people, that may be Google Sheets. And that is really, I think, why this integration exists. I think it is why I would recommend people at least explore it. I think it is totally understandable if you come into this and go, hey, this isn't for us. This isn't, we don't like the lack of governance. We don't like how wrong people could go to some degree or whatever it might be. But I think there are lots of organizations where people aren't familiar with Sheets, where using Sheets and Looker together can be a really nice pairing, and where if your job is, hey, we want to get as many people using data as possible, kind of meeting them where they are is really key. And that comes with some overheads. It comes with some administrative process. It comes with additional governance processes so that you know what's happening and how it's being used and you educate people in the right way. But I think people, to some degree, as I kind of talked about in the last slide, like to some degree, people may already be doing this already. They may be downloading from Looker and doing the last mile analysis for them in Sheets. And this kind of just helps them do that in a way that is faster, is expedited, but also where it may, they may get better metrics. They can guarantee that everything's coming from your Looker semantic layer. So from there, let's talk about how it works. So connected Sheets in Looker is a way to query your LookML model from directly in Sheets. So I'm going to talk about this kind of other bit later in the talk. There was an old integration that allowed you to define a look in Looker and then export that with an action, or write some kind of custom Google script in Google Sheets to just pull that look in on some schedule. This is not that. Connected Sheets with Looker, their new integration, is about actually defining the data that you want to pull in Sheets, and that all happening like automatically in Google Sheets. So there isn't a saved look. There isn't a data action on the Looker side. This is really about like, I am in Sheets, I want to pull data in, and I'm going to do everything in the Google Sheets view. And I'm going to talk about the trade-offs between kind of this and the old integration slightly later in this webinar. So this is actually remarkably easy to set up. If you are on Google Workspace and you have access to Google Sheets, which I know many companies do, if you're not on the Microsoft stack, more often than not, you're on the Google stack. You come into Sheets, you click the Data tab at the top, you click Data Connectors right at the bottom here, as you can see, and you'll see that there's two options there: connect to BigQuery or connect to Looker. And so if you're a BigQuery customer on GCP, you can access the connect to BigQuery. But if you're on both of these, more likely you're going to want to have people pull this like nicely modeled governed data that is in Looker, and you're going to click connect to Looker. And then from there, you're going to see something like this that says enter your instance URL. And so you are going to put in your URL. In our case, it's spectacles.looker.com. You click continue. There's actually a brief auth in between where you kind of, through your Google user, authenticate with Looker. But it'll then take you to this, where you pick your model, you pick your Explorer, you click connect. And when you end up is in a UI like this. So it kind of appears in a new tab. So you can see here at the bottom, there's a new tab that kind of shows that this is the database connection, shows the data that's available to you. And from here, you can schedule refreshes, and I'll talk about that a little later. But you can mostly just investigate the data that is available to you. So you can see it, you can scroll through it, you can see the descriptions. This is a good reason, I guess, to write descriptions for your LookML, because they all are going to show up here in this table. But you can see what dimensions and measures are available to you, what what types they are, whether it's dates, numbers, strings, whatever it might be. And then you'll see that there's a pivot table button up here in the top left. You can then click that to get a pivot table. If any of you aren't familiar with pivot tables, they're a lot like a Looker Explorer, actually. And I've historically defined exploring in Looker as kind of like pivot tables on steroids. They're a way to take a tabular data set and cut it and slice it and filter and aggregate in lots of different ways. And the UI typically looks like this, what you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen here. And it breaks down into a couple different ways. So this is basically the same pivot table UI that you would normally get in Google Sheets. And you can add and construct these tables in a couple different ways. And they map basically in a one-to-one way with what you have in a LookML Explorer. So rows, this top bit, are the equivalent of Looker dimensions. So they're the same as picking a dimension and adding it to an Explorer. Columns, you can only use with dimensions. And that's the concept of like a pivoted dimension in Looker. So if you want to have values in a column that you want to, if you have values in a column in your warehouse in a dimension that you want to have pivoted out as column names, that is what you would do here. You would add them as a column in the Google Sheets UI. Measures then all go in the values section. And then filters are Looker filters. And so you can construct probably not 100% of what you can do in a Looker Explorer, but a lot of what you can do in a Looker Explorer, you can generate here in Sheets directly. And so as you go through this process, what you end up with is something that looks a little like this. And so you can see that we have this Explorer. This is a demo data set that we use internally at Spectacles. And I've said for rows, I want the created year. I want the number of order items as the values. And then I want to filter for only orders that have happened after the 1st of January, 2021. And so very similar to the experience that I would have in Looker, I've generated a data set in Sheets. And what's cool about that is that can then refresh automatically and auto-populate as and when I need it. But it means that I could combine different types of things. You know, I could produce multiple of these in Sheets and produce different types of analysis in Google Sheets, whether it's, scenario analysis or any number of the long list of things that people do in Google Sheets as a tool. And so, as you can see, this is pretty similar to what you could do, the types of queries that you can run in Looker. It really just brings it into the Sheets context and allows you to extend it in whatever way you want. And so you could, use conditional formatting now on this in the Sheets way, or you could join it with another data set that you just have in Google Sheets, for example. For all the reasons that people do analysis in Google Sheets in the first place, you can kind of extend this for all of those use cases. Which kind of leads us to the question, and someone actually was nice enough in our Slack to ask this yesterday ahead of this, so I've kind of prepared this this slide in response. Why not use the original integration? And for context, it's the screenshot of roughly how the original integration works with Google Sheets. And the idea historically was that I'm going to produce a query in Looker, and I am then going to push that to Google Sheets. And so you'd set up on a schedule in the same way that you set all schedules in Looker. And you can see here, you select Google Sheets, which drive you want to send it to, which folder, enter a file name, and it would then run on whatever schedule you want. The upside of this was that from a content point of view, you knew everything that was built and being kind of pushed out. And so from a governance and a content validation point of view, if you made a change to your LookML, this look, would be impacted, you'd be aware of it, and you could kind of update it in a way that the Google Sheets, the new connected Sheets integration doesn't allow for. And I'm going to talk about that a little more in a second. And so there, I think, will be lots of organizations who say, actually, we'd rather that to be more on the kind of stricter governance side, and we're still going to force everyone to build these looks in Looker and push them out. My view on why to not use the original one is the same answer I had before, which is meeting people where they are. And if your goal is to get adoption of data across your organization, it may be that people will use it more if they can query that directly in Sheets. And I think many of us as like BI practitioners have this like utopian view of everyone getting data from a single BI tool. But I think there are people who will either get it in Sheets or they may or might not ever adopt the BI tool as the alternative. And I think for many organizations, they're going to make the trade-off of saying, actually, we do want to get this data in people's hands. We're happy for them to use it in Sheets. I think the other reason that you might want to use the new one is it gives you greater flexibility. You can pull multiple data sets into the same Google Sheet. You can be much more kind of creative and selective about where those pivot tables exist in different tabs and things like that. So you get much more flexibility and creativity because you're building it directly in Sheets as opposed to it kind of being pushed out from Looker itself and you kind of being confined by that integration and just kind of the guardrails that they put in place there. And I talked about it a second ago. Let's talk a little bit about monitoring usage. So you've got all these people now building these things in Google Sheets. What can you know about it, basically, is the question here. So it's really cool, and this is a screenshot from the System Activity Explorer in Looker, is in the System Activity Explorer, they have added dedicated fields for connected sheets. So you can see here there's an API client name where you can filter for all queries that come from connected sheets. And then you can see the spreadsheet ID, you can see the trigger, you can see which fields were used, you can see how often it's being run, how recently. And so what's really cool about this is that you can monitor all the usage, you can see all of the spreadsheets that have queries being pulled. And so you can look at, hey, how many spreadsheets are pulling information in the last week directly into Google Sheets? What fields are they using? What users are they? So you can drill this down all the way to the user level, because that's the way the OAuth connection works between Google Sheets and Looker. And so from a usage and tracking point of view, you can get really, in my view, almost all the information, or pretty much all the information you'd want about where it's being used, what fields are being used, and all that type of stuff, which is, I think, really interesting and something that if you do invest in this as a way of people interacting with Looker in your organization, you are going to want to set up some monitoring of. So this is going to give you tons of information around what is being used where. Unfortunately, as I talked about earlier, Google Sheets or the connected Sheets integration doesn't ship with a content validator. So in this example, let's say we've got this field called order items created year that is being used in a connected Sheets query. If I were to go into LookML and edit that field such that it was no longer named that, we are not going to see a content validation error in Looker. So Looker is not going to tell you in the content validator, hey, you have a report in Sheets that is using that field. You either may want to like not do this change or go and make sure that you fix that after you push the change. And I think that is one of the most substantive shortcomings, I guess, of this integration is that you just don't have that piece. Looker will report on queries that have come in, but it's not aware of the content that is built in Sheets. It doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. I think there's every chance that content validation gets extended to things like Looker Studio and Google Sheets, but as of today, it doesn't exist. And so in theory, if we just kind of go down that path, what would happen, I think there's a couple options of how you do that. So I'm changing order items created here. I think the first thing I could do is if I wanted to really do a lot of due diligence is I could come to this Explorer and I could filter on that field and fields used and find all the reports that are using it and notify the owners or go and fix it myself. I think that's option one. Option two, which I think it would be reasonable for some organizations to say, hey, you're welcome to use this in Google Sheets. Occasionally things might break. And so, a user who had built something would then come back after you change it and say, hey, my report broke. I can no longer find created year. And you would say, oh, yeah, it's now called this name. And then they go back to their sheet and fix it. And in theory, if they're using the sheets, they'll do that. And if they're not, you don't need to be as worried about breaking it. So there is that is one area where pushing data out from Looker into Sheets by saving a look could be better because you get that content validation support. It's really going to depend on the trade-offs that you as an organization decide on. Let's talk about requirements to connect. So to set this up, you need a handful of things. You need to enable either all BI connectors in Looker or specifically turn on the connected sheets. And you can find this in the admin sections. You need to be an admin to turn this on. You don't need to be an admin to use this integration, but to turn it on for everyone, you do need to be an admin. So you go to add more admin platform BI connectors and turn that on. And I'm actually going to show that in the demo in just a second. So that's step one. Only need to do that once. Because of how the authentication works, user email addresses in Google Workspace, or where you're using Google Sheets, needs to match up with the user email addresses in Looker. So if you've got different, if my Google email was dylan@spectacles.dev, but my Looker email was dylan.atlasbaker@spectacles.dev, that wouldn't work. And so there is a requirement here that the email addresses match up across those two systems. I imagine for most people in most organizations that is going to be the case, but it is something that they call out just because of how the authentication between the two tools works. Users must have access to the explorers in Looker that they want to access in Sheets to access it in Sheets. So this kind of goes without saying, but the user in Sheets has access to the same data that they have in Looker. So the same governance model is in place there. If you have access to something in Looker, you have access to it in Sheets. You can't access things in Sheets that you couldn't otherwise access in Looker. And then there's some requirements on the instances. So it's currently not available on self-hosted. On Looker hosted, there's specific versions, which I've outlined here. And if you have IP allow list, this requires some special setup. It's just around the IPs that are coming in from kind of Sheets and Workspace and making sure that that's all set up appropriately. And then there's a handful of other than the content validation limitations, there's a couple things they call out. There's a maximum limit of 30,000 rows for connected sheets. So if you're trying to query more than that, you can't. Something to bear in mind depending on the use case. I think almost all use cases, reasonably speaking, will be less than 30,000 rows. But if you've got this killer use case that you wanted to use this for, and it involves pulling in 1.5 million rows into Sheets, I probably wouldn't recommend this aside from that limitation, but this limitation will also get in your way. And then if the user doesn't have the download without limit permission, so this is a permission that the user would have in Looker, the result will be truncated to the kind of standard maximum 5,000 rows, regardless of what they're trying to pull into Sheets. And so again, this is basically just saying, hey, your limits in Looker are replicated in Sheets. You don't get to circumvent those just because you're doing it in Sheets. You're bound by the same things. Perfect. Let's jump into a demo. So let me stop sharing. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk through really the steps that we talked about earlier, but kind of show it in a more hands-on, practical way. So the first thing you're going to do, let me zoom in a little, is you're going to jump into Looker. And I'm on the page already, but you go to your admin section and you make sure that BI connectors are turned on. As I said earlier, you need to be an admin to do this step, and this is just a one-off. And so you can either turn on all Looker BI connectors, and that'll turn on Google Sheets and Looker Studio, or you could just turn on Google Sheets if you just wanted to limit that one. I'm going to turn them all on. As a kind of side note, we did a webinar 4 weeks ago on the Looker Studio integration with Looker. And so if you're interested in that, head to spectacles.dev/webinars, and Josh, my co-founder, presented on that and talk through in the same way that we do here, kind of the whys and why nots of why you might want to use it and how you get it set up. And we can share that in the Slack after the webinar today. So I've turned that on. And so what I'm going to do from there is I'm going to head over to Sheets, where I'm going to zoom in a little, and I'm going to talk through and go through the steps that I talked about earlier. So you click Data, you go down to this new Data Connector section, and you click Connect to Looker. So I've done that. I already have set up this instance, but I could have got rid of that. The first time you do this, you're going to click spectacles.looker.com. You shouldn't all type spectacles.looker.com. You should type whatever your instance URL is. It's going to briefly take me through some OAuth, and then I am going to end up back here. We use this for a whole bunch of demoing, so we've got a bunch of models in ours. I'm going to use this demo e-commerce model. So I select a model. I've got a couple explorers. I'm going to select my orders explorer. and I'm going to click connect. And it tells me with a nice graphic, hey, you've successfully connected to Looker, and kind of talks us through, the things that we can do. So I'm going to close that. And what you get is what I showed a screenshot of earlier, which is the data set with all of the different views that we could pull from. So it highlights these in a similar way that you'd see down that left-hand bar in Looker, and you can see the fields, what type they are, both kind of the category dimension measure or parameters, things like that, and also types, and the descriptions for each one. As I said earlier, this is like, I think, a good reason. I think writing descriptions for your dimensions is good regardless, but seeing them here like this, I think, provides people with a really nice UI around this. And if you ever do want to enforce people having descriptions on their dimensions, we've recently released a linter that you can use to enforce that, to make sure that anytime someone adds a new dimension, they add a description there. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click pivot table. I'm going to add it to a new sheet, and I'm going to click create. And so what I get is a pivot table UI that many of you may be familiar with if you've used Sheets. Obviously, if you've used Excel, it doesn't look quite like this, but it's very similar. The concept of a pivot table is the same. And then from there, I can just add stuff in here. And so what I'm going to do using this kind of fake data set is I'm going to put created month in. And maybe for a second, I'm just going to stop there and I'm going to click apply. And we can see the data come through in a second. There you go. So you can see every month that we have orders from. I may then want to split that again by product ID. Or maybe I put in, let's put in product ID as the ID, and then click apply again. And in a second, it goes to BigQuery and gets this data, is going to give us the result. Thinking about it. Oh, I've done something wrong. We have too many products, and so there's a good example. I've just gone over the 30,000 limit, and so that is something that you're going to have to be aware of here. It does return an error, but you do need to kind of think about, as you build these queries here, how many rows is this going to return, and things of that nature. So for the moment, let's go to values, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to count orders. So I'm going to add a measure there, and then I'm going to filter, and I'm going to say created date should be after, and let's go in and put an exact date of 2021-07-19. And I click apply. And there you go. So really quickly, we've got this data in the similar way that you would explore it in Looker. We get this data into the Sheets UI. And then obviously I could either visualize this in Sheets and insert a chart, for example, that highlights those. I could build a forecast. I could do a whole range of things. I may want to go back and go, okay, well, I want to actually know the number of order items and the number of orders. And so I can add that here. I can click rerun, and it's going to generate a second measure here and do it that way. And so hopefully this gives you a sense of what you're able to do. And because the answer, I wish I could show you more, but the answer is really, you can do really kind of most querying that you can do in the Explore context in Looker. It just brings this into Sheets very natively. The final thing I want to show you here is that you can either click to refresh this manually, and it'll say running the query, and then it'll pull in the new information. Or you can set a schedule. And so in the refresh options, you can do a scheduled refresh, and you can say every 1 hour, every 1 day, every 1 month, whatever it might be. And there's lots of kind of more advanced stuff you can do, but you can set that up. And so that's all native in here, which is nice. And so again, where I was talking about kind of the difference between the two integrations, this really does allow you to manage it all from Sheets. And so if you do have Sheets power users, instead of them context switching between the two, they may prefer to do it this way. And I think that's one argument for doing so. I'm going to stop the share there. I'm going to actually jump back into the slides. And before we get to the Q&A, I just want to highlight something before we jump into that. And this is kind of separate to this. We at Spectacles, for those who don't know us, we run a continuous integration service for Looker. So we run a whole bunch of automated tests on your Looker instance to make sure that you're not breaking anything. We are starting to look at how we can provide additional features to Looker customers, particularly around speeding up the performance of your Looker instance. And so that's things like speeding up Looker queries, removing unnecessary LookML, deleting unused content, and really providing a bunch of insights and automated workflows for Looker developers and admins to make Looker as performant as possible for you and for all your business users. We are about to start a beta for this in a major project where we start building out a bunch of these insights for customers as we kind of get it to something like GA. If you are sat in this webinar today and you're thinking, oh, our queries are so slow in Looker, or there's so many explorers that have fields that aren't being used, or there's just so much bloat, we've got way too many explorers, or whatever it might be, or, oh yeah, there's so much content from people that they built it once and it never runs. If you take any of those boxes, or you're really feeling any performance pain in Looker, please come and speak to us. We'd love to have an initial call. We'd love to see if you're a good fit for the beta that we're going to be running. It's totally free. It's to work with us to build things that help companies solve these problems in Looker instances. And so you've got my email here. It's dylan@spectacles.dev. Please drop us a message. We'd love to chat with you, even if it's just a 15-minute chat to explore whether this would be a good fit. We've been through these problems ourselves. We care passionately about solving these problems, and we're really excited about working with people to tackle them. So there's other ways you can get in touch. Drop us a note in Slack as well. But dylan@spectacles.dev is going to be the easiest way. On that note, let's jump to the Q&A, and would love to answer any questions people have. There may be some that have been asked already in Slack, but if you haven't yet and you have some questions, please drop them there, and I'm going to go in and dig through them now. Let me see. Comment from Simon about having the sheet ID is helpful. Yeah, the metadata available here, I personally actually think is, it's not as good as having a content validator, but it is really useful for auditing usage, for understanding what's being used where, for having a go at people who are abusing it in some way or whatever it might be. Perfect. So let me read Lewis's questions here, which is, with the new Google Sheets integration to a given Explorer, can we still benefit from Looker symmetric aggregates? In a nutshell, can I stop users from summing incorrectly over distinct counts of active users using totals in Google Sheets? Is intuitive but potentially dangerous here. So, Lewis, to answer your question, yes, the data that is returned by Sheets in the pivot table itself is going to run the query through the same query engine that it was before. So it's going to, not have fan outs, and it's going to count distincts over different things correctly. What I would say is I think there's a greater risk in Sheets if you are doing a count distinct that someone just like grabs the 10 cells and then sums them up. And so there's still going to be a data literacy thing there that you need to navigate. But the data, as far as I'm aware, the data that is returned by Sheets via this connector, all of that data itself should be totally accurate in the same way that it would be in Looker. I'm hoping that answered your question, but if it didn't, just let me know. How does it refresh the data? Mariana asks. Answered that, hopefully. Yeah, we got a green tick there. Question, can you combine the pivot table from one Explorer with other data, such as other Explorers or other Sheets, similar to blends in Looker Studio? So, assuming I'm understanding your question correctly, you can generate multiple pivot tables in Sheets and then do whatever you want with like VLOOKUPs or index matches or all that other stuff in Sheets. As far as I'm aware, there's no way natively within the Looker connector to like blend two Explorers and to kind of set joins up there in the query language in the way that Sheets connects those to Looker. But there's nothing that stops you, and I expect this is a use case that people will do. They could use merge queries for it as well, but maybe there's use cases that are more complex where they'd rather do it with custom logic and sheets, where you pull in 3, 4, 5 different pivot tables of different data and then do a bunch of things with VLOOKUPs. And Sheets has got this like really interesting query like query function, which I quite like. And so there's lots of ways that you can do that. And so I think there's a world with that query one, for example. I don't think you could join, but you could pull a table out and then write kind of like a SQL-like query on top of it in Sheets to do some more custom aggregation if you really wanted to. Yeah, to Simon's question, it looks like users, to Simon's comment in the Slack in relation to Lewis's questions about kind of like double risking, the risk of double counting distincts and stuff. There is definitely a risk there. And I think my view is look at that. There's a risk to some degree of people like misusing measures in Looker as well or doing dumb things. It's obviously less of a risk in Looker. But I think a big part of all of this is data literacy and educating people on how they use these tools. And I think if you're using a tool like Looker, a big part of your job is just educating people on how they can use stuff, how they can use stuff safely, like how they can draw insights from data. Not everyone feels super comfortable or well-versed in things like that. And so as you as a company go down the route of deciding, hey, is this Sheets integration a good fit for us or not? Some of it's gonna be around the governance piece, some of it's gonna be around how you feel about managing the education of your end users and things like that. If people are interested in all of this or continuing this conversation, it's all happening in the Slack. And so would love to have that continue there. It looks like we don't have any other questions. If people do have some, get them in fast and I'll try to answer them. But otherwise, that's going to be it for us today. Really appreciate you all joining us for this webinar. The interaction in the Slack community is always fantastic. And so we really appreciate it. I hope this is something that, not that necessarily that you'll use, but you'll explore. I do think this is something that for some organizations will be a good fit and for some organizations it's not. But for us, it's been really interesting. I mean, this integration is relatively new to us. And been really interesting just getting hands-on with it. And I'd highly recommend that it really takes no more than like 15 minutes to get a pretty good feel for how it works. I'd highly recommend you go have a use of it if you are on Google Workspace. And I expect if you're here, you probably do have access to Sheets, unless you're just generally interested in all things Looker. So that's going to be it from us. Big thank you to all of you for the awesome engagement and for the attendance. We will be back in 2 weeks with the one on system activity explorers and digging into those. And a final call out, if you are feeling any kind of performance pain on your Looker instance and you'd be interested in working with us as we roll out our beta of some of these new features that we're thinking of, please drop us a note. You can message me directly in Slack, or my email is dylan@spectacles.dev, and you will see us there. Awesome. Well, have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Thank you.